The NDIS is a fairly complex proposal for change, and yet at its heart, it is extremely simple. The NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, is a proposal to absolutely radically transform the way disability support and services are offered and supplied to people with disability in Australia. Most of us are aware of the statistics. Approximately 1 in 5 people are in some way affected by disability. They either have a disability or they care in some way for someone with a disability, and that includes me. I have 2 kids. My 16-year-old son has a physical disability, and our family has travelled the journey that so many hundreds of thousands of other Australians have, and we have direct experience in how disabling the current system is and how much it damages the physical and emotional and educational and mental health journeys that most families have to undertake when they're trying to support a family member with a disability. And in Australia, almost all people with disability are supported extensively by their families. So the proposal for an NDIS was an idea emerging from the 2020 summit, which actually had its genesis when Medicare was introduced. The Whitlam government was also considering quite seriously introducing some form of disability insurance scheme, but political events intervened and they never quite got to implement it. So if we fast track to the 2020 summit, the idea for a national disability insurance scheme was generated there. Kevin Rudd then progressed it to the Productivity Commission, asking them to investigate the feasibility of changing Australia's disability support system. The Productivity Commission did an investigation for about 18 months. It travelled around Australia and I thought did an extraordinary job in really coming to grips with the real issues that confront people with disability and their families. The Commission took 1,062 submissions, far more submissions than it received for any other inquiry in its history, and it offered up its final report very recently, and the federal government, to its credit, acted very quickly in starting the process rolling once it had received the final report. The Productivity Commission found what anybody who lives with disability knows, that the current systems in every state and territory, and there are 9 altogether, are inequitable, underfunded, fragmented, inefficient, and they don't give people with disability and their families any choice. In the final report, the Productivity Commission recommended the introduction of 2 schemes, the NDIS, which we are going to cover here today, and the National Injury Insurance Scheme, which is a much smaller scheme, which is more aligned to the third-party comprehensive insurance schemes, some of which operate very successfully in other states. Again, every state is different. At its heart, the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the NDIS, is a monumental change. At the moment, if you have a disability in Australia, you are not legally entitled to any support. Some people get it, and if you happen to be disabled as a result of a compensable accident, then you are in many ways fortunate and receive much more of the supports and entitlements that you need to be part of everyday life. But most people don't have a legal entitlement to that support and actually don't get the support they need. So I'd just like to give a few examples. Lily, who lives in Brisbane, is 38. She has a physical disability because of a swimming accident that was not her fault. Someone dived into the pool, accidentally landed on Lily, and she became permanently paralysed. Lily doesn't have any family support, and she tries to live alone in Brisbane, relying on a few hours of support that the government agencies and NGOs can provide. Because Lily's needs aren't assessed, and because she has no legal entitlement to support, Lily has to get by on 2 showers a week. 3 showers if she can prove that she has daily incontinence issues, and she must prove that. Not only is it unimaginable, I think, especially in a warm climate like Brisbane, but it's shattering for Lily, because much as she wants to simply see friends or try and get a job, she used to work in the tax office, she'd like to work there again, she absolutely lacks the confidence to have anything to do with anyone because she's worried that she smells. It's something as basic as that. Someone else who is a great example at the opposite end of the spectrum, Mary, who lives in the Gippsland area in Victoria, is 92 in February next year. She is still the sole primary carer for her daughter, who has an intellectual disability and is blind and is deaf and has a partial physical disability. She gets 4 hours of support a week, and that's it. And finally, Peter in Perth, who's 27. He also has a physical disability that's quite extensive, that limits his function quite dramatically. Nonetheless, it's because he is young, perhaps it never occurred to him that he couldn't continue to do everything he wanted to do. He's put himself through school, TAFE, uni, has a job, is greatly in demand, his skills are sought after by his employer, and he'll have to give up his work because the support that he gets, while adequate for him, can only be used at home or in the community. The personal support that he needs for about an hour a day during his working hours is not available to him at work. So he's going to have to give up his job, stay home, and take the disability support pension. So those are just 3 small examples of how utterly stupid the current system is, how it destroys lives, and how it damages Australia's financial capacity. Because most of those people could be employed one way or another, either the people with disabilities themselves who have ample capacity to work with the right supports, or the carer of someone with a disability who at 94 should probably not be expected to get back into the workforce, but who would love to have worked, who would love to have had the capacity to go on holidays, to be able to have a bit of discretionary money to spend and not spend her life trying to pay for daycare or wheelchair type equipment. So there is ample scope for change, and we believe the NDIS will absolutely provide that. The NDIS will become a legal entitlement to support based on assessed need. It will provide a secure and consistent pool of funds from which support will be drawn for approximately 410,000 people with disability, whose disability level is severe enough to affect their daily activities. That includes people with physical disability, intellectual disability, sensory disability, and some forms of mental illness, which in essence becomes a disabling condition. The NDIS is intended to be a national system so that it's portable across Australia. So the assessment that you receive in Kalgoorlie is the same type of assessment that you will receive in Hobart. And finally, and most importantly, the NDIS is intended to be person-centred and person-focused, and will be based on the choices of the person with the disability or their families, depending on the age and developmental capacity and assessment of the person with the disability. So although there's a lot of discussion about what will be the actual outcome of the NDIS, it is really going to be an extraordinary cultural change that will take a lot of grappling with, because change is often very hard for many people to come to terms with. The table that you see now essentially summarises the changes that we hope will happen, going from a charity system to a rights-based system, from measuring the cost of providing support and services to recognising that those supports and services are an investment in people that will yield a return, an economic return as well as a social return. A change in terminology, not services, because not everybody needs paid services, but support. A shift in economic focus from supply of services to demand. The NDIS will be a demand-led change. Instead of funding services, the person will be funded, putting the person at the centre of the system. And finally, we believe that this will change people dramatically, change people and families so that they are no longer bystanders in our society, but active participators. To be eligible for the NDIS, you'd have to have a permanent disability, so lasting more than 6 months, and have significantly reduced functioning in self-care, mobility, communication or self-management. So this includes intellectual disability and mental health conditions. Other requirements are, I think, in many ways, the Productivity Commission trying to ensure that nobody is left out of this system if they don't actually clearly meet the first requirement. But I think in the very early stages there's going to be a fair bit of grey area and negotiating as we come to terms with what's the best way to design a system to actually deliver the support it needs. Once a person has been assessed and then deemed eligible for support, they will be entitled to a package of support and services. This is a very dramatic change. People would then be able to choose their own service providers, or they would be able to ask a disability support organisation or more than one organisation to assemble a package of supports on their own behalf, or they'd be able to cash out parts of their funding and personally direct the funding to those supports which best meet their needs. This lists the type of equipment and support, all different varieties of support which are considered to be ways to enable people with disability and their families to forge their own way in life. The list is fairly comprehensive, but we expect as the disability scheme is rolled out, especially in the early trial stages, that there will be changes to the types of support that are offered and demanded. How much the scheme will cost is, of course, an issue of great concern to everybody. The Productivity Commission has said that an effective NDIS would cost an additional $6.5 billion. Australia currently spends about $6.5 billion at the moment. So you can either say, yes, it's going to end up costing about 14 billion, and that's a lot of money, or you can understand that Australia spends 50% less on disability support compared with what it should spend. So if we can just imagine if we translated that lack of expenditure perhaps to the educational health systems, if parents were told that because of funding constraints only every second child could go to school, there would be an uproar. And it is exactly the same situation here. The funding is so limited that very few people actually get the supports they need. The second side of that coin is because of the very complex and bureaucratic multitude of disability support systems, there are enormous cost savings that can be made. And one of the most significant ones is trusting people with disability in general to know what they need and how they need to direct their supports to make the most of their lives, rather than having to go through endless multiple assessment processes every time they try and get something like a disability parking entitlement or a carer payment. The Productivity Commission estimates there'd be about 410,000 recipients of the NDIS, and it is recommending multiple launch sites to be started in 2014 so that the scheme can be tested. The launch sites we don't know what they're going to be yet, but we are hoping that they will encompass the variety of conditions that Australians find themselves in. So clearly a scheme that operates in Perth is going to have very different needs to a scheme that operates in Kalgoorlie. So somehow we have to be able to combine the underlying principles and values and structure so that there is a sense of fairness and transparency and people genuinely understand that they are entitled to the same supports regardless of where they live. How we deliver those supports, and many of them will be new, there will be a lot of entrepreneurial work in this. How we deliver that is up to us, not necessarily up to government, up to people like yourselves and people like me who are the users of the service. It's intended to have a national rollout to all high priority target groups in 2015. The high priority groups are ageing family carers, young people who are still living in nursing homes, and young children under 5s who perhaps don't have the most urgent need but represent the best investment, because as we all know, the earlier you invest in early intervention and support, the better the return you get. The NDIS is expected to be fully functional across Australia by 2018. So that's created a bit of anxiety, I think, and lack of understanding. The NDIS is intended to be completely rolled out by 2018. Most people will not have to wait until then to get some kind of support. The timeline was devised by the Productivity Commission to enable the process of negotiating agreement between the states and territories and to build the underlying structure that is critical to ensuring the NDIS is robust. So as you can imagine, there's a fair bit of underlying work that has to be done. However, the federal government seems to be very keen to bring the timeline forward by 1 year, and I think everyone in the Every Australian Counts campaign believes that that is in direct response to the urgent demands for support as fast as possible from people who simply can't keep going as long as they have been for the last 3 decades. So the Every Australian Counts campaign is a national campaign to support the introduction of the NDIS, to ensure that the federal government, whoever that is, whichever party that is, in 2013 commits to introducing the NDIS. And we understand that because it is a major change, that the community has to accept the need for this change. About 18 months to 2 years ago, the slide on the screen now shows where we were at. Lots of individual problems and awareness of the difficulties in functioning in such a disabled environment, but no real genuine political awareness or commitment to change. The Every Australian Counts campaign has held an enormous variety of NDIS forums, meetings, events across the country in the last 12 months and chinked away at trying to raise community awareness of the need for an NDIS. And of course, we understand that for most people, the NDIS is not going to have an immediate impact and probably will never have an impact on their lives. It is social insurance, and most people will not need any form of disability support. But disability can and does happen to anyone, and if you need it, it's a great comfort to know that the support that you need will be available. I guess in terms of Peter's framework, the stage we're at with the NDIS is that we are on the voyage, the early stages of a voyage, and we're identifying and creating ways to manage strategic change. So all of us are all part of this voyage. We all have different groups, different inputs into it. We are different stakeholders. We aim for, in many ways, different outcomes. And so for the input that you have as individuals and your organisations, there are no real answers. In fact, there are no answers at all because there is so much change, potential change that is happening. But we encourage people to think about the enormous opportunities that exist, both to support people with disability in ways that they want and that many of you know they need, and also for people with disability to become part of the system and perhaps become a much more significant part of your organisation, offering the skills and experience that would represent true inclusion and true diversity in our society. We ask everybody to sign up to the Every Australian Counts campaign. On your table you would have received these brochures, which give a very brief explanation of the NDIS, and on the back of this one it's a sign-up form. We need at least 100,000 supporters. We've got about nearly 82,000. Those figures are from yesterday, so we've got about 82,000 now. We ask everybody to sign up and support this. There are, of course, many issues that need to be considered, and I'm sure many of you have many questions. The Every Australian Counts website has an enormous supply of information that really explains very clearly the effects of the NDIS upon ordinary Australians, on ordinary people, their families, their communities and the nation. So I do hope that you are able to visit the website to have a bit of an understanding of the need for all of us to become actively involved in this and to support this campaign. Thank you.